Good morning. It is Tuesday, April 20th. We're here for the regular board meeting for Franklin County. We have a quorum, and would you please join me? I'm calling the meeting to order, and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, with that, we have the approval of the April 6th meeting minutes from the commissioners meeting. Do we have any
changes?
No changes? Well, there was one change that was made. And I'd just like to say that when we do table a motion, that means that it has to be brought back up at the next meeting in order for it to, and a second, for it to have discussion. So that was changed on the meetings. Excuse me, Commissioner Peck, you didn't ask to be recognized.
Yeah, point of order.
Point of order.
I'd appreciate it at next week's meeting. Maybe you could bring in a reference to Robert's rules that require an item that has been laid on the table to be brought back the next week. I'd love to learn that new information. I don't believe it's the case. Thank you.
When a motion is tabled, it has to be brought back up as a motion. Just what you clarified last meeting, and that was taken out until next week. What was removed was Commissioner Peck moved to table the motion until next week. Until next week was removed because it does not be brought up unless it's a form of a motion again in the next meeting. So that was clarified.
So
the next thing on the agenda is excuse me, Commissioner Peck.
I say continuing with my point of order, since you have contested my explanation.
So are you asking to be recognized?
My request is that next week.
Are you asking to be recognized?
I did. That's what a point of order is.
Did I recognize you yet? Okay, Commissioner Peck, you're recognized. Proceed.
The motion I made to lay the item on the table, to my understanding, does not require an item to be brought back the next week or at any particular time. And given that there's always a possibility of learning something new, I would appreciate it if next week you would bring for us the citation of Robert's rules and educate all of us so that if I'm mistaken, I can be accountable and we can do it right next time.
Okay.
And if not, well, then we can all learn together. But we ought not be.
To table a motion means that the motion is, you kill a motion, and that's a way of killing a motion. It's been used throughout our state over there and the feds. Is when you want to kill a motion, you table it, and unless it's brought back up as a motion and seconded, it cannot even be acknowledged. So that's it for there. Let's move on to the public comment.
Good morning, commissioners. I want to pick up where I left off last meeting. When I first came here, I was able to have free time and I wanted to serve my community. I have helped you. I have helped you. I have talked with you, but I've never been asked to help, okay? I do not have favoritism. I'm trying to focus on Franklin County. I was brought a notebook of many allegations. When I looked at it, I was very alarmed. And so I told Mr. Beaton, you need to take that to an attorney. I did not know at the time that his wife was a city attorney. So I took note of what he told me, made an appointment with my commissioner, because that's the district I'm in, and I went and confronted him with very specific things and in a fairly confrontive manner. He calmly explained some things to me. It satisfied my for the most part. I did check on some factual things because that's all I have to go by is facts. And I was satisfied with that. Now, I understand in a family, kids can squabble, okay? But these allegations keep coming up. For example, in the evening meeting, the allegation that he double dipped. That is a bona fide benefit of not only him, but of the deputies that have served in the military. You haven't served in the military, there are benefits that come with that. I've worked in human resources. I've also worked in long-term care, which was pitched last week by by Conovers. I would actually ask Conover to show that Mutual of Omaha is not as competitive as the other company they cited. I would ask for those numbers to be presented specifically. Yes, he's a broker and he looks for our best interest, but I would like to see the proof of that, because Mutual of Omaha was the leading factor in long-term care when I used to be a representative on Straight Commission and supported my daughter as a single mom. So I have to go by facts. We have had business brought up in the county meetings that are from here. That is a breach of the Open Meetings Act. We cannot do that. And as a chairman, the wonderful lady came and spoke beautifully about her children and the activity and the effect of COVID and the schools not being open, and you properly directed her to the school board. But it is not, Mr. Chairman, your right to tell her the school board needs to be replaced. That is a party matter. That stays out of this. I may share that opinion with you, but your chairmanship here and your membership here as a commissioner is separate from your party chairmanship. Okay? And I was not informed that I had 4 minutes when I came under duress. And so I'm going to go back and review. The RCWs do make you the CEOs, not him. And I want to share another bit of information that kind of clicked in my head last week. Not to accuse, but in order to help and bring consensus, because it needs to happen. I used to work for Kinley and Haygood Company. They were management of multi-properties, everything from hospitals to retail malls to office places, even multifamily, and the Spokane Industrial Park. They worked very closely with the EDC, okay? So when somebody came in, such as he mentioned last week, with 200 to 400 prospective employees to get the best advantages, they worked with Randy Hayden, and I know Randy Hayden. I've worked with him. He manages the port out here by the airport. That's where Power City Electric is, and that's where my husband is a branch manager. They've been very fair and good to us. But when a company is competitive and they don't want stuff to get out, they keep it very tight, very competitive. And if they came to the one that's most experienced, which I would really encourage you to continue to build on each other's experience and perspectives, because that is the role of government and that is the role of your positions. They kept it quiet with him and he gave it to him. He can't surpass him because he's the CEO. This conspiracy and in the public meeting at the county party meeting, we're being lied to is not accurate. Take time to ask questions. Take time. And I'm directing it mostly towards you. And I thank you for this time.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Keith, would you clarify on that port, what happened there? Who contacted you? Because after I talked to Mr. Hayden, he clarified everything for me. Would you please clarify it for the public?
Well, yes, I certainly respond to your question. The port has been working with a number of companies, but one in particular, to bring additional investment in the Ryman Industrial Complex. Because of the competitive nature of that, it has not been publicly discussed.
And we don't want to publicly discuss it. All I'm
Correct.
asking is, when I called Mr. Hayden,
Yes,
I asked him how the people that were engaged were informed. He said he called you,
he did.
invited you, and for you to bring one commissioner, correct?
Correct.
Okay, that's all I'm asking. That's how you got to go to the meetings. And Commissioner Peck, what he said last week was not above board, so I just want to
Well,
clarify that that's what was discussed
would
and how it was.
I would clarify that this discussion did not just happen in the last few weeks. It's happened over several months.
Okay,
And Commissioner Peck was involved in the early discussions with the port.
okay. So we'll continue on with public comment.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Peck.
you have made an inaccurate statement, so let me clarify the record. I wasn't privy to the conversation between Mr. Hayden and Mr. Johnson, so I don't know what was said. Mr. Johnson did not invite me to the meeting. I was invited to the meeting by Mr. Hayden, who called me and asked me to attend. Now, when an outside party calls and asks Mr. Johnson to invite a commissioner, it puts him obviously in a potentially difficult position. I wasn't part of that conversation. I don't know how it went, but I want to be clear. I didn't attend the meeting as at the invitation of Mr. Johnson. It was a personal call from Mr. Hayden. Now, if he didn't share that with you,
You
feel
didn't.
free to revisit.
I will.
Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment. Is there anybody else for public comment? Anybody on the phone, Keith?
Yes, I do have one caller on the
Okay.
line. Good morning. Ms. Hatch, is this you?
Yes, it is. Hey, so I've been listening. I was not planning on calling in today. I appreciate all of our commissioners. A couple of things. I think it's pretty rich for someone who has been so inconsiderate in the last two commissioner meetings to scream during the discussion when it's not time for public comment and to stomp, and then to use epithets to one of the commissioners is completely untoward. And I mean, if it were me conducting the meeting, I think Commissioner Didier has been way too kind. I would have had that person removed, because it's not just about her. It is about the people and all of the people. And we want to hear. And even when I disagree with commissioners, I would never, ever disrespect their position. And I've always addressed them as commissioner and administrator. And I just feel going forward that for people to preach, they ought to be living it as well. So just that one point. The other thing is that really and truthfully, we talked about this last week. If something is happening in a particular commissioner's district, that's really who Mr. Johnson should have brought it to. I don't know if it was Commissioner Cook was the commissioner, or during Commissioner Mullins, but it really should have been brought to one of them. And then if it was brought to Commissioner Cook, he should have then informed Commissioner Mullins. That's really the way it should have been done. And then brought to the next meeting privately in the executive meeting where it's not made public. All of these discussions, this competitiveness is just crazy. And the fact that Commissioner Peck last week didn't seem to have a problem with that. I think that his behavior sometimes is just over the top, inconsiderate, and as if this is some sort of game and manipulation. And I'm really, really exhausted of it. I can tell you the public is, that you are supposed to be working together as a team for the people. It doesn't mean you always agree. You shouldn't always agree, but there should be some a standard of communication. And as I stated before, Administrator Johnson is the conduit. He should be informing the commissioner, hey, this is happening in your district. You might want to go talk to these people or kind of make yourself familiar. That's good government. That's all I've been asking. And there's a difference between what is ethical and what is legal. I pointed that out last week. And Ms. Andrews seems to think that everything that as long as it's legal, it's okay. But what we were concerned about with the double dipping is that ethical? If you're getting benefits, why charge the taxpayers even more benefits when you don't need it? And that's the point of that. That's about ethics, not illegal. There's lots of things that are legal that are unethical. I think abortion it's legal, but I don't feel it's ethical. And cheating on your wife or lying or taking credit for other people's work, all unethical, but completely legal. So we want our government to be ethical, way above the law. And that is the point of some of the concerns that are happening at Franklin County. It's not about breaking the law. It's about being ethical. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Hatch. Is there anybody else public comment?
No, sir.
We got Dockstetter.
George Dockstetter, 4951 Self Landing Road. I had a conversation with Commissioner Mullen about 2 weeks ago that said we're going to get a pretty huge amount of money from the federal government for coronavirus. And I was wanting to find out how much it was and where it's going to go.
Well, Keith, yeah, help yourself.
Sure. Yes, the money coming from the federal government is coming through different avenues. What's called the American Repair Act, which is the primary source of funding, will split $18.4 million to Franklin County over 2 years. We're supposed to receive the first half of it sometime before the 10th of May. We do not have full explanation from the Department of Treasury yet on what the allowable uses of those funds are. We do know that they have to be spent by December 31st of 2024. So this board has not formally engaged in a plan for spending that money yet. We have received a couple of ideas from different interest groups like the Tri-Cities Chamber of Commerce, Franklin PUD on some work that they're doing. But as I said, the board here has not adopted any kind of a formal spending plan. We've got some ideas for some priorities, some things that we could use those funds for, but we have to first get the guidance from the Treasury on how that money could be used. There are also some additional funds that are being discussed at the federal level. The Biden administration is putting together a infrastructure plan that will send money to the states. We do not yet know how much that is or when it will be authorized. Senator Murray and Congressman Newhouse are working on several proposals and plans for additional earmarked funds for their Senate district or congressional district and state of Washington. We're monitoring that daily, but again, those plans for how that money is going to be used have not been formally adopted yet. So we're still in the planning phase and in the communication phase.
Okay, so it's not going to have to be used for health district strictly like
No.
the last funds?
Not necessarily. There may be some reason to use it, but the Benton Franklin Health District, I believe, has received some of their own direct allocation, as have some of the other jurisdictions. But thus far, we have not committed anything to the health district.
Well, I hope you take into consideration that we've been stripping the road funds for the county for the last few years. And I would love to see that money replaced and put to use. When you go on some of these side roads out in the county, they are falling apart. And either that or use it to fund the study or preliminary engineering for putting a bridge across the Columbia River, which I've been hounding about. We're gonna double again in 12 to 14 years. And there's no way Road 100 and Road 68 or 4th Avenue can handle that kind of traffic. So anyway, I hope you have a real open mind on where we put that money. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dockstetter. And yes, we are looking at the roadways. If we can, that's where we would like a lot of it to go.
Good morning, commissioners. I want to speak on and echo what Mr. Dockstetter said. We really need to get our arms around the traffic issue that we're having. As a developer, one of the requirements that falls on us is when we develop a parcel is to do a TIA or a traffic impact analysis. And we really need to do that from Sagemore South in Franklin County to figure it out, because we're on course to have a crash with our roadways. We really need to consider this. And it's interesting as I go to a lot of public meetings and listen to people talk about this. Everybody says the basic same thing. We need to do something, but somebody needs to take the bull by the horns and drive the bus, so to speak. And we do need another river crossing. And if you guys like me, drive Road 68, Road 100 area every day, it's just getting worse. And we still don't have a plan of what to do. You know, a bypass highway at Self Landing or a little bit farther north would make a big difference to let traffic go. So we are getting some unexpected money. I think that would be a wise use of it. Get a traffic impact analysis done and figure out what our plan is moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Anybody else on the phone, Keith?
No,
Okay. We move down to the office business. I believe we have 2 vouchers.
We do. Move for approval of fund expenditures in the total amount of $836,367.90 as presented. And note that it has been reviewed and signed by 2 representatives of the auditor's office and the county administrator.
Second?
Motion and second. All approved, say aye.
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 Move for approval of salary clearing, payroll, and emergency management payroll in the total amount of $976,939 as presented, and note that it has been reviewed and signed by 2 representatives of the auditor's office.
Second?
Been a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, with that, we move down to the consent agenda. I believe there's 5 items on the consent agenda.
Move for approval of consent agendas 1 through 5.
Second?
Been a motion and a second on the 5 items of the consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, that moves us down to the administration office business. Keith?
yes, sir. The first item is consideration of Resolution 2021-081. This is brought back from last week. It's a amendment, or excuse me, a resolution supporting primarily the First and Second Amendment, but all constitutional rights for citizens in Franklin County. We have reviewed this with the prosecuting attorney's office. They are now comfortable with the language that does not encroach upon the ability of the sheriff and the prosecutor's office to exercise appropriate discretion in their duties, and recognizes that.
Okay, now I don't see it's a resolution, but I don't see a number with it. Is there a number with this resolution, Keith, or do we have one?
Yeah, it's Resolution 2021-081.
Okay. Commissioners, have you had a chance to review? And do we have approval?
I move for approval of resolution 2021-081.
I second. Discussion.
So, Mr. Chairman, I've got a few questions on this. What is the purpose behind this resolution? Why are we doing it?
To reemphasize our constitutional rights granted to us by the supreme law of the land, the U.S. Constitution, and our state constitution, that we have the right to assemble, we have the right of free speech, and we have the right to our Second Amendment to protect our lives, our families, and our possessions. Reemphasizing what the Constitution says, and that we, as commissioners, took an oath to defend it.
So I get the notion of reaffirming. It was not uncommon in my 2+ decades of active duty military service to reaffirm one's oath of office every time you got promoted. I'm curious where our oath of office requires us to affirm our support in defense of both the laws and the Constitution of the state of Washington. If maybe this resolution shouldn't have included everything that we're committed to in our oath, since, as you just said, we are reaffirming our oath. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we see the attack is on our freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, and on our Second Amendment. These are the ones that are under attack right now, and there are avenues of executive orders and means outside of our established ways of making law to attack these. And so as commissioners, we're trying to show the constituents of Franklin County that we're willing to stand. So this is pretty plain and simple, not too elaborate, but it basically says we're standing with our Constitution, the Supreme Law of the land, and we're not going to allow, and I think our sheriff has already said he will stand with us on this. The sheriff would like to come forward and see if he has a problem with this resolution.
Mr. Chairman, if it's all right, I'd like to continue on our train of thought here before we go outside. I've got additional questions. Reading from the draft resolution, it says, whereas recently proposed legislation and executive orders from the President of the United States and the Congress and the executive and legislative branches of the state of Washington have sought to limit or eliminate certain traditionally held rights. Is that an appropriate expression for this body in our constitutional republic?
Absolutely. We're the closest government to the people, and I have to say that I think Keith Johnson did a fantastic job of writing this. He's the one that put this together, and after a little bit of correction last week, I think we have a resolution here that's pretty plain, simple, and front and forward in our thinking here as commissioners and our oaths to our office.
So, like me, I'm sure you take your oath seriously to support the laws of the state of Washington as well as the Constitution of the state of Washington.
That's why we're doing this resolution.
Okay, I appreciate if you put your mask on, by the way. That's one of the current laws in our state.
It's not a law.
Well,
Show me where the legislature passed that law.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sheriff, would you please address
I
this
still
issue
am,
of this?
Mr. Chairman, I'm still
Excuse me,
speaking.
Commissioner Peck.
You don't get to just end my comments. I'm speaking.
Actually, I will. Yeah.
Thank you, Sheriff.
I am supportive of the resolution and have no objections to it. I believe it creates a statement, and I don't believe, as it's now written, that it takes any inherent powers away from me to protect people's constitutional guarantees, nor the prosecutor. So I am fully supportive of it and have no objections to it.
Thank you, Sheriff. Commissioner Peck, you have something else you would like to say?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do.
Please.
This little pin right here says I did 2 decades plus wearing a uniform for this country defending that Constitution.
Thank you for your service.
I think it's panderous, and I think it's self-promoting and politically motivated here to waive the Constitution and say, you know, we support and defend. When we take that oath of office at the start of our term, that means a lot. So I'm unclear why it is we need to go out there and take shots at our representative republic government, which is what you're doing. Now, to be clear, we're of the same political stripe. I'm no fan of the current incumbent in the White House, nor am I a fan of the politics of other members of the House. But as Mr. Johnson has explained, we spend a lot of time on these kinds of things that are really very much outside the scope of our direct responsibilities as commissioners. So I'm going to support the resolution because I support the Constitution, but I would invite the board to focus on the many, many other matters that this county needs to be dealing with, like redistricting, instead of spending the county administrator's time drafting resolutions to reaffirm publicly something that should be absolutely crystal clear to our constituents by virtue of our oath of office. And if someone has taken an action that's unconstitutional, then I think we can address these kinds of things. But it is my preference that if we end up going down this road in the future, that we understand that the emergency powers that the governor, of whom I'm also not a political fan, the emergency powers that he's using were given him by the state legislature. So he has that legal authority. And whether we like it or not, we have an obligation to support and defend the laws of the state, even the ones we don't like as much as we do the Constitution. So that's simply my point. Let's not pander and posture over the Constitution while we're simultaneously violating oath of office by ignoring state laws. Thank you.
Okay, with that, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Well written.
Thank you. The next discussion item is an item that we've dealt with a little bit in the past. I wanted to give you an update from what's happening in Olympia regarding the controlled substance ordinance that we will be considering. As I stated before, this came from the Blake decision where the state Supreme Court ruled that possession of certain narcotics would not be a criminal act. There is legislation that is proposed. Current piece of legislation is the engrossed Senate Bill 5476. That is, again, as I said, still being debated. There is a hearing, an executive session in the House Committee on Appropriations tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to consider moving this bill forward. The bill would make it a gross misdemeanor for possession, and if it's the first or second offense of the individual, the prosecutor is required to divert the case for treatment. And if it's a third or subsequent violation, the prosecutor is encouraged to divert it for treatment. But under those first two offenses, it's required of the prosecutor to do it. That's the current legislation. Obviously, that could change in debate in the legislature. They could amend it. But that's the current status of that bill.
I got told that it had passed the Senate. Is that correct?
Yes, it's now in the House.
House.
Yeah.
And it can be amended there.
Correct.
Yeah.
If it's amended, it would then, assuming it were approved by the House, would have to go back to the Senate. Now, they are scheduled to finish their session. I believe Sunday is the last day of legislative session. So it's going to be, by next Tuesday, we should have pretty good information on what they're going to do.
So if my memory serves me correct here, if they amend it, that means it's got to go back to the Senate. So if they amend it, it's dead.
Not a good, yeah.
I don't think that should stop us from moving forward to let our law enforcement do their job.
Certainly, we can't leave them hanging, and I
No.
think there's agreement in the community to make it at least a misdemeanor, if not a gross misdemeanor.
So if we were to make a motion today, it would just be 2021-082, correct? A resolution? Could we do that?
I think we
Oh,
would
an
have
ordinance.
to state that in an ordinance, and probably that may require even a hearing to do
Okay.
adopt the ordinance.
That'll require a hearing with notice to the public for comment, just like any other ordinance.
So that's a 10-day, how many,
That's
10 days of, okay, well, I think we probably need to get that notice out there. We need to get our law enforcement to be able to do their job and to protect the citizens of this county. Go ahead.
Speaker, if you want to open it up, I can provide you.
Yeah, I'd like to open this up for discussion with the audience, so please help yourself.
Yeah, as stated right now, I think it's been recited correctly, what we have going on. It's the bill that we thought had the most traction did pass in the Senate. In the House, it picked up a number of different amendments. So it's going to be a difficult decision because I guess the political consideration is the House probably didn't want to be left as the blame is on them if they didn't do anything. Now they almost put so many onerous amendments thinking that maybe that in essence might kill the bill. So, but there's still some hope that the Senate will come together and be able to resolve it in a way that it will have some kind of passage. The concern is if they pass anything, there's a chance that the preemption will kick in and that all these counties that are trying to do their own ordinances would not be able to proceed forward. So that's kind of the dilemma we have of trying to rush something forward right now. But certainly we're looking at language. We're still working as WAPA because one of the things that we've wanted to do as the other prosecuting attorneys throughout the state is to develop something that is going to be very defensible. Because we know that if we pass our own county ordinance and we're, let's say, an outlier, like we're doing something very different than, say, other counties, we know that's going to get legally challenged. So we want to do whatever we can in the interest of protecting our citizens. And as I've shared before, I have a strong interest because I've seen the success of drug courts and other therapy treatments that I think they're trying to address in Olympia. And the concern is if people aren't forced, if people don't see the possibility of jail or prison in their future. I've even met with people up at Coyote Ridge and talked with them, talked with people that have gone through and said, if I didn't get arrested and I didn't go to prison, I would be dead because I was engaging in dangerous behavior. I was addicted, and it was only that prison or jail consequence that got them on the path to sobriety. So I agree, we fully need to do something because right now we don't have anything to protect kids. It's illegal in the state to consume alcohol under 21 or to even possess cigarettes under 21, but we don't have anything right now for possessing fentanyl, heroin, meth. It doesn't make any sense. So I'm really hopeful still that our legislature will recognize that, hey, we've got to get something done. If not for anybody else, for the under 21 crowd, because we hear in many other areas of discussion, the adolescent brain. We've had Supreme Court cases that basically said because a person was 18, 19, and 20 years old when they committed this horrible crime, that the court needed to go back and reconsider the fact that they might not have fully developed their brain. That's for 18, 19, 20-year-olds. These are individuals that have signed up to defend this country. But yet the Supreme Court on one end says these individuals have to have their sentences looked at and evaluated if appropriate because they might not have been fully developed mentally. But at the same time, we're not doing anything to protect those under the age of 21 from these harmful substances. And it's not just substances, it's the other actions that I'm concerned about. The forgeries, the thefts, the burglaries, because the habit has to be funded. There is no way of getting state-provided meth, state-provided heroin. Thank goodness. Hopefully we don't go that way. But that's the concern we have. So hopefully I am still hopeful that something will be passed because I think the discussions going on in Olympia recognize it's a grave disservice to everybody if they don't do something. It's not going to be something that I would personally probably like, but I think it'll be something that will be meaningful. And if not, Sheriff and I want to definitely see something for our county and for our citizens. And I think that's the same for Benton and the surrounding area, at least. And that's where we'll do what we need to do as appropriate. But we will need to put that on for time to make sure that we have the public input, just like we would on any ordinance. But I think the ordinance that we've seen language, I think Grant County's ordinance is kind of close to what we're looking at. We're still having regular discussions with WAPA to make sure that we kind of have those legal minds together so that we recognize that, hey, whatever we do, let's try to be on the same page so that way we could defend it collectively as well. Because it's much better to have strength of numbers. It would be better to have a state statute to defend rather than individual ordinance, but we're going to do what we have to do. So thank you for considering this again and keeping that a topic of discussion, because I think the citizens of our community need to know what their elected officials are doing. And this is not a fault to our local leaders, because all of them are trying to get different variants passed. I've discussed with that. So we're all on the same page locally. Unfortunately, they haven't been able to get it moved over. So there's been a lot of concession making, and we'll just have to wait and see.
Before you leave, Commissioners, any questions for Prosecuting Attorney Sean Sam?
I have no questions. I do support your work and effort, though. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
We discussed this last week with Wasack, and I think your assessment of the situation is accurate, concise. Just need to wait and see if the legislature is going to do their job.
So I'm hopeful. We'll see, I guess, to get some direction after that hearing tomorrow. So we'll be watching, and we do have our WAPA. Typically, this would be the time of year that we would be meeting at WAPA, but we're doing that virtually this year. So we have an executive board meeting this evening, as well as our membership discussion tomorrow. So this will certainly be an ongoing topic, as it has been ever since that decision. So, and I'll keep you posted accordingly if I find out something more, hopefully by Friday.
Mr. Sant, while you're here, maybe I just ask a quick question on procedure in the legislature. I understand it's in House Appropriations tomorrow, assuming they, and I realize it's assumption, assuming that they pass it out of the House Appropriations, that it would then go to the House floor for full consideration by the House.
That's my understanding. So it has to be passed then off the floor, and then at that point, it'll go to the other chamber. And I believe at that point, there won't be time for any kind of revision. So essentially, the Senate will be in a difficult position where they'll have to accept what has been proposed by the House, even though there might be some divisions there. But that's where I come to think that even though it might not be perfect, the Senate might just be willing to accept some of those amendments that they might not have otherwise liked, but just in the effort to get something in force. Otherwise, we're going to have, and they recognize this, they're going to have 39 potential counties with different laws written, and I don't think they like that idea either. But, you know, they should take action.
And
So-
remember, it's not law until the governor signs it.
Right, Zach?
If, I said, and
Right.
remember, it's not law until and if the governor signs it.
So Sean, have you seen the amendments that they proposed?
I've seen some of the key amendments.
Is it taking the heart out of this, what they passed in the Senate?
I think the biggest thing is that they're trying to create the system of the diversions, the mandatory diversions where so many will come up, or the idea that it would be only an infraction. This personal possession level would be an infraction. I think that's one of the biggest things that they're trying to propose. And so that's hopefully my position would be, hey, fix the language, put the knowing language back in there, because that's what the court found, is that because it didn't imply knowingly possess something. In other words, someone didn't have to have a criminal mindset that, hey, these were not my pants, and I had my drugs in these pants, and these aren't even my pants. That's literally the case facts that went up to the Supreme Court. So I get it. The former law implied a strict liability, so you didn't have to prove that someone knowingly possessed it. Although majority of our cases, we all had that. Factually, we all had that amount of evidence, and so that's one of the issues, is trying to fix that language. But then what they're doing with the amendments is modifying the severity. In other words, would this not be a felony? Would it be a gross misdemeanor? Would there be an infraction? Would that only be for the first two, where it's a mandatory diversion, or what happens at that point? So that's what we're kind of looking for.
And I've also seen where they've actually set money aside for restitution for people who have been wrongfully placed. If this all goes through, wrongfully placed in prison, possessing drugs, they're going to get restitution.
I haven't seen that. What I have seen is the funding mechanism to restore, because if the court has invalidated the law, that is going to require a reimbursement for any fines that the people have paid solely on this count. And so that gets complicated, because many times the drug possession case, those originated because they booked them in for another offense. They get them to the jail does their search, they find the contraband, and now they're charged with the possession on top of other offenses. So it gets complicated, and that's why the focus for our office has been on those people charged with only that as an offense. So for those cases, if there was anybody that was currently in our jail or in prison on one of our cases where that was the only charge, we had to process that immediately to try to get those individuals released to relieve our liability. But for those other cases where they have other charges that were pending, or where it was considered part of criminal history, we're still waiting, because there could be a change once this goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is entertaining a reconsideration motion, and some of the indicators that suggest that they're taking this seriously is they have requested an answer from the other side. So in other words, the Spokane County, they filed their motion for reconsideration. The Supreme Court then has requested an answer from the other party. And they don't usually do that. Sometimes they could just simply say, no, we've made our decision, that's what it is. But by requesting an answer, it sounds like they're either going to double down and get everybody's input, or they could actually, if we get a decision that changes a little bit or slightly, it might affect its retroactivity effect or things like that. It might not, I don't see it saying, oh, we got it wrong, we'll just imply this knowing element. But what could happen is it could change how it's applied retroactively. So that could be a difference there. But again, until we have that motion and that ruling, that's why we're not focusing on the cases that might have been collaterally affected. We're trying to deal with those that were solely incarcerated just on the possession count.
Mr. Sant, wouldn't they have to change their ruling since they cited it as a case of first impression?
That's right. And so if they took it under consideration and said it's not a case of first impression, and there's certainly some argument that they have addressed this issue previously, if they did change that, that does change the retroactive effect, and it would only be for the prospective, for the given case as well as the prospective cases. That would be ideal. That would be nice, because everybody has dealt with this since 1971 to some extent, dealing with possession. And that's what we're having to do, is go all the way back to 71 and figure out who has been convicted. Many people have already vacated those sentences, because if that was their only offense and they've been crime-free in the community for a period of time, they could get those cases vacated anyway, if that was the only felony case that they had. And we've certainly helped people that have done those petitions previously and met the eligibility. So we've done that.
Okay, I think,
So if I can real quick.
help yourself, Sheriff.
Waiting till next week, is probably the prudent thing to do, to see what our state officials are gonna do. I'll be perfectly blatant with you. I'll bet they address it. But, which leads me to this part, to continue on developing the ordinance as a misdemeanor, so that there's some sort of law enforcement facilities out there and have it ready to go for whatever way this answer goes. I think that's prudent upon you all as commissioners to make sure that happens.
Yep.
I know that people out in the community, that they don't like it the way it's sitting, and we need to be addressing it somehow or another. And I get where the prosecutor's coming with, you want to be on the same page and those type of things. But at the end of the day, if they reverse and go back to felony possession or gross misdemeanor, you just simply get rid of your ordinance.
Right.
So please stay on track with it until we see what happens next Wednesday, if somebody said. Maybe everybody's cup truly is three-quarters in Ohio.
So we will probably have to put it out for the 10 days, which is actually going to put us out 2 weeks. It'll be past the session and we can make our decision then. So let's go ahead. I think as a commissioner, I think we're all in agreement that we will proceed and put this out for notice.
And just if I could clarify, the issue that we want to make sure that we're able to address, and I'm hoping that we'll have that additional collective insight this week, is when the notice goes out, the notice should go out with the proposed ordinance. And that's
Okay.
what I want to make sure, that we have a good product that goes
Okay.
out there. Granted, that doesn't prevent the board. My understanding is that it wouldn't prevent the board from making those additions based on public comment or other things, minor tweaks. But certainly we should have a product that we believe is, one, a defensible position consistent with what we're seeing other counties do. So that way we are in line. And I think from what I've seen from Grant County, that I believe after they made some of those corrections, revisions to their earlier proposed one, I think that's pretty consistent. And we're talking with Garth and, the other prosecutors, especially on the eastern side of the state, that seem to be consistent with wanting to get something in place.
So you have that pretty much in place?
So we've got the discussions. It will need some tweaking still. And so we can get that developed, and I'll coordinate with Keith to try to make sure that he has something that I think would go. But I think what we'll need to do then is we'll need to have something for the board to agree with next week. And then we'll kick out for the 10-day notice for the ordinance hearing. And then at that point, get that passed out. And we'll try to do that consistent with the timelines for getting our notice out to the graphic and other media outlets.
So that'll put us 3 weeks out to pass it in a board meeting. Okay.
Approximately.
So Sheriff, just tell your deputies to, I know it's tough. I've heard testimony from numerous ones that said they've actually seen people with crack pipes and meth pipes and they can't even touch them.
That's correct. That's what's happening.
And they're with a lighter in their hand. I mean, I've heard testimony from your deputies and it's sad that that's where we're at today. Is there any other questions for Mr. Sant? So Keith, I guess we'll get to work on that and hopefully have it ready in about 3 weeks with public notice.
Thank you.
We'll see what happens next week. Continue on.
Yes, the next item we've discussed in the past as well. There was a property owner in Franklin County that Matt Mahoney and I met with late last week to kind of discuss what they were thinking and proposing. A great proposal, great idea. We, as Matt discussed in the his presentation last week to the board regarding our 6-year transportation improvement plan, there's some modifications that we might need to make to that, but we did have a healthy discussion with the landowners to explain kind of the process of what it would require to include their proposal in our plan. It's still, I guess, at the preliminary discussion stage, but I think it was Mr. Dockstetter today that raised the issue of traffic and bridges and transportation and those kinds of things that need to be considered in the west side of the county. So we're still working on those. I'll continue to work with Mr. Mahoney and our road department to get those plans in place. But
Do you want to bring Mr. Mahoney up? Does he have anything to add?
Matt, do you have anything you want to add from a technical side on? I would just say that
We're talking about the intersection there of Dent Road.
Yeah, exactly.
68, where
Yeah.
Douglas Fruit is at.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yes, that's correct. We had a great conversation with them. I went through all the boring details on how projects are created and the processes that you have to go through in accordance with, of course, state law and then federal law. Tried not to get too much in the weeds with them. One thing I want to add too is with some of the earlier comments is, way back when we did the Road 100 extension, there was an extensive traffic study that was done. And the board at the time, none of the board members here were sitting on the board at the time, made decisions that were a little bit contrary to what was proposed, which I think we need to be revisiting as well as it pertains to Road 100. And I don't know if this is the time or place to bring that up, but I think it's important for people to know that there was a major traffic study that was done for that whole area, taking in all the future growth. Of course, we've seen a lot of that growth happen today. Part of those discussions, of course, we weren't talking about another bridge that was going on at a different level other than us. That was occurring, I believe, at the COG level and there was a huge study that was done at the time. But as far as that area and other areas, traffic studies were done. I think we need to revisit those traffic studies. I think we need to have those updated and revisit some of the original plans that weren't done, that were chose not to be done as part of that Road 100 extension project, that were cut out of that. I think that we wouldn't have some of the problems that we have today if that was, if all of that was considered at the time. But then, of course, at the end of the day, it all comes down to money and funding. So we have to be able to commit or go out and get the money to be able to do all the work that needs to be done. So
Could you at least enlighten the commissioners that are now sitting on the board with that information? Can we all get
yeah, one of the major components.
in written form, can we get it
Yeah.
in a way of an email?
Yeah.
And show us what was discussed back then? And
Yeah, I think one of the major components was a direct connection to Columbia River Road. As you see now, you go up Road 100, you take the Broadmoor Boulevard interchange, you head north, and you will end at Fanning Road.
Mhm.
And it was actually the original plan to go all the way and connect to Columbia River Road, where Columbia River Road would actually be the main route as you're heading south, and there would be a nice curve on Columbia River Road bringing you straight down, what we consider the Road 100 extension through Fanning, down through Easy Street, all the way through. So pretty much unfettered access to take care of that traffic that we knew was going to be coming based on the current zoning of the day and the growth that we could see even along the river north of that area. And so that was, in lieu of that, the board at the time chose to do some work on Fanning Road, which included getting rid of that, what we call a short span bridge, and putting in a culvert pipe for widening there. And we paved LaPorte, which is a local access road. But it still creates major conflict. So I think that's where we're seeing maybe a little bit more traffic on Columbia River Road and people having to weave through to get to Road 100, which makes it, we know that when we're driving, when it's a lot of turns and a little bit more inconvenient, we prefer to take more straight lines. So I'm just pointing out absolutely, I can provide that original report to all of the board members, but it's just one of those things pointing out that sometimes we have to deal with these unintended consequences of the decisions that were made. I respect the decisions the board made at the time. They were very sympathetic to a landowner. And that's what they took into consideration with their decision. But we just got to make sure as we move forward, I believe we do need to revisit, and we need to come up with a completely new traffic study and look at that whole area of our county along with other areas of the county. I think there's some other specific areas we need to look at, and I'll gladly work with Keith to move this forward and provide the board with all the information.
Thank you.
So Matt, a couple of questions. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So you've had conversations with Keith about this possible road revisions, and I don't recall you bringing anything to the board or forwarding materials to the individual commissioners. Did you do that? Have I missed that somewhere?
On this specifically, no.
Okay. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what these possible road revisions are, since that's the topic on the agenda and no one seems to be specifying that.
Well, at this point, I don't know. Typically, we follow the statutes, the RCWs, when we establish and develop a project. And one of the major components of that project, any project that we do, especially, and I want to speak specifically to where we're breaking new ground and making new changes and require right-of-way, doing some of the work that we do inside the existing right-of-way, all of that, where we're not changing the alignment, adding new alignment, whatever. That's a little bit simpler process. But the main process is we need to come to the board with what they call a design and location hearing. And that's where the engineer provides the board with the report. And that report is made up of all kinds of information. Main focus of that is public involvement. Of course, anybody who's been part of our workshops and stuff where we meet out in the community, that's part of the process. So public involvement is a major component. Of course, all of the necessary studies would be part of it. And then usually the goal is we bring the board usually a minimum of 3, but hopefully 4 options. The first option, of course, is always the do nothing option. And then there's usually 3 other options that have all of the pertinent information, input that we receive from the public, as well as the costs associated with doing each option. So before a project can really get off the ground, there's a lot of work that we have to do up front before we come to the board with the engineer's report, and then a decision would be made following a public hearing. So, and we explained that to the landowners that we met with on Friday and kind of went through the process. So it is a pretty lengthy process. Sure. And before we ever even get to right-of-way acquisition, of course, we need to get through, as a minimum, the SEPA, which
Well,
is the state
Let
of,
me,
yeah.
let me just slide in a question here.
Okay.
Commissioner Didier said at a previous meeting, he'd already talked to the landowner and arranged that right of way or that access. Does that expedite the process?
It could expedite the process when we get to the right-of-way acquisition phase. I did inform them there, of course, before that could happen, we, of course, are required by law to inform them of their legal rights under eminent domain, and that would have to occur first. And before that can happen, of course, the process that I explained just a few minutes ago has to occur before we ever do that. So they expressed to us that they are willing to work with us whenever that opportunity arises. And so, yes. Did that answer your question, I hope?
Close enough, thank you.
Okay.
I was just going to add that the traffic on LaPorte is extremely heavy, and intersections on Fanning and LaPorte and LaPorte and Columbia River Road are dangerous intersections.
Yes.
And it's just a very matter of time before there's going to be an accident there, if there hasn't been already. People coming off of Fanning onto LaPorte, there's so much traffic at that intersection. They just take for granted that you're going that route. And I've seen people roll through the stop signs there. At the other end of LaPorte, your line of sight is bad as far as seeing what's
Correct.
coming down Columbia River Road. So I just wanted to make sure that those points were brought forward.
Yeah, it's a struggle because, as you know, a lot of these roads really weren't designed for that. These were built as part of the Columbia Basin Project. Their main function is, especially for these local access roads like LaPorte, is just to provide direct access to the farm units themselves.
Exactly.
And so now we put those in a position where
Yeah, you've got
they're
big
taking
machinery.
traffic that they were never designed to do. And Columbia River Road is the road that is designed to do that, like Taylor Flats and like Pasco Clotis and Glade and our major and minor collectors. That's what they're for. So the whole idea is that, unfortunately, the decision, like I talked about, the unintended consequences of decisions that were made in the past. And I just think it's important taking note from the residents that are living in here, that are talking in here, that we need to go back and revisit these studies and get them up to date and bring them back in front of the board.
So one last question from me is on Road 100, the overpass over the highway, who is responsible for safe passage for a pedestrian? We've got kids, when we open back up the schools, everything's gonna be going. They're going across that bridge. There is no crosswalk. There's nothing. Who's responsible for that? The city?
The interchange itself.
Over the highway?
Yeah, that's the state.
That's the state?
Yeah, state of Washington.
We
yes.
better clue them up that there's going to be a fatality there of these
Yeah.
kids crossing that highway, and we need to get something there for safe passage for
Yep.
these kids walking to and from school.
Absolutely. I have no problem passing that on to
Please,
Washington
thank you.
State on behalf of the board. Yes.
Any other comments for Mr. Mahoney?
I was just in agreement with that. It's just last week I seen looked like a 10 or 12-year-old girl trying to cross the freeway there at Road 68. It's just, I mean, there's so much traffic there.
Yeah.
It's just a matter
Yeah, when I'm leaving work, I usually wait until well after 6 o'clock to go home to miss all of the traffic. And, I've worked for Franklin County I'm going on my 32nd year. And I always tell everybody, I used to be able to drive to work. I know this is wasting the board's time, put on my cruise control, never have to switch lanes. And now it's every man for himself on I-182, even at 7 in the morning, 6:30 in the morning. So certainly I've seen it happen. And unfortunately, the growth has happened and we just have not stayed up with it. Yeah. And I don't know at this point, what we can do. I think we need to be very precise on how we move forward, where we get the best bang for our buck, I believe that's where we're at now. So.
Thank you, Mr. Mahoney.
Mr. Mahoney, I'd ask you to stick around for the rest of the meeting. There are other questions I think are going to come up that we're going to need your help with.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
So Keith, we're scheduled for an executive session. Do we want to do the last public comment for
I
people?
had 2 callers on the phone, so that might be.
Let's do the
recommended.
public comment first.
Okay.
Okay. So
Thank you.
let's go with it.
Good morning. Is this Mr. Wells?
No, this is LaWanda.
All right. Mr. Wells.
Sorry to disappoint you.
No, Mr. Wells was a caller, but he must have hung up. So go ahead, Wanda.
Yeah, maybe. The reason why I was calling is I know listening to the sheriff and Sean Sant, I really feel strongly that we need to do something as a prosecuting attorney Sant stated that the laws that we had really have saved lives, and I can testify to that of at least 3 people I know that ended up in federal prison, and they are alive today, and they admit that it is for that reason. And I know one person that was not, and she is dead. So just that point. The other thing that I was wanting to talk about was the importance and the reason why we want to reaffirm the Constitution is because what has been happening in our state, the whole mask mandate, everything, it may be the rule, but it is unconstitutional. We were told, we are taught, Congress shall pass no law that infringes on our pursuit of happiness and our rights and my body, my choice. So we have a very liberal Supreme Court in this state. So they're not going to rule with the Constitution. We understand this. So that's why it is so important that we have our people that govern our community do stand and reaffirm it. So, and there is a time for civil disobedience. Henry Thoreau stated this. And if it weren't for civil disobedience, and this is not violence, this is not breaking windows or burning down buildings or beating people up. This is not sitting at the back of the bus. This is sitting at the lunch counter. This is the Underground Railroad. This is not wearing your face mask. These are things that we can do as civil servants because we have our freedoms. And there are 3 branches of government, but the people are also a part of that. And for us to use civil disobedience and to demand that that our leaders live by the original meaning of the Constitution is so vital. It doesn't matter what the state Supreme Court says. If it's unconstitutional, it's unconstitutional. And Congress voted away our representation. That is unconstitutional in itself. So it's really important that we do that. And the Supreme Court, for example, the Dred Scott decision, that was unconstitutional. But they decided on that. They are not the final word of what is constitutional and what is not. And so I appreciate the vote today. I appreciate all 3 commissioners voting for that. So I just wanted to speak to that. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have one more caller.
Okay.
Toronto?
Yes.
Good morning. You have
Good
the
morning.
floor for 4 minutes.
Thank you. I was just calling in today. I think I wanted to let you know that I've been accessing some public records lately, and I was looking at the request, and there's a part on it that says that rather than having copies made of public records, that there would be an ability for people to come in and view the records rather than having copies made. So I was following up with some information on that. I wanted to know if there is a computer at the courthouse where I could access public records. I was told that there is such a computer. However, I was notified that because of the governor's proclamation, that the ability to use that computer has been suspended until the end of the state of emergency. And the point I wanted to make today is that I understand, I read through the proclamation and it's talking about public meetings. And I was wondering, because the commissioners are now having public meetings and the public is now allowed into those public meetings, I just don't see anything that should prohibit my right to access the public records on that designated public records computer. So I just wanted to point that out, and I will be following up with the prosecuting attorney's office to figure out why it is that I'm not being allowed to come in and use that public records computer at this time. Thank you.
Is there anybody in the audience for public comment?
I want to readdress the roads again, because a lot of it falls on the three commissioners. You've been approving these subdivisions with 2-lane roads when you should be, we don't have to take the property by eminent domain. You just tell the developer, you're going to give us a right-of-way for a 5-lane road if you think it's going to be a major road, like Burns Road. We've got those subdivisions down there. There's no provision for turn lanes. You need to force them to do it. I'm against government regulations and forcing people to do things, but that's the only way you guys are going to control these roads and get them developed to standards. Because the yahoo they got at the city planning department, he thinks everybody's going to ride the bus. He doesn't think there's going to be any traffic on Road 100. All those people are going to work in that project and ride their bicycles. They've already screwed up 68. You'll never get 68 wider in 3 lanes if you get that the way it's developed right now. They allowed Greeno, who I've known and friends with, to come all the way out to 68 without giving up any road right away. And he got to build 2 extra duplexes, but we're stuck with a bottleneck. So you could turn these back to the planning commission and say, we want more road right away, just like the one we did on Columbia River Road. What are you going to have? All those cars coming out of there on 2 lanes? You ought to at least have a turn lane out there that far. And Dent Road, Fanny Road, and we're going to have more of that stuff coming up. So it's just something to think about.
Thank you, Mr. Dockstader. Anybody else, public comment?
Okay, so back in review of the meeting, I want to respond to Ms. Hatch. The motion to fire Keith was brought up after public comment. In fact, literally, Mr. Chairman, you turned away, and I thought the meeting was closed. That is something that deserves public comment. And there were no epitaphs, I have to say that, but I'm very used to Ms. Hatch's accusations, misrepresentation on quote unquote taking credit for other people's work. That was on a manual that was proposed, and neither of you looked at it and you voted on it and just swept it away. The meetings that, the paper that I passed out a couple weeks ago showing you all the meetings of the different municipalities was in that book. And as a citizen that wanted to help my county, and this was under a different party chairman, I asked if I could help in that way, and I asked Benton County to give me their template, which they were more than happy to do, and I acknowledged their help in that the whole way. These accusations are going to cost her, and this is what I mean by having party business brought into county business. As her chairman, she's the one that's at risk and is already in a defamation suit. That is a public record. She is probably at risk of getting about 3 more. And, you know, I of course, public discourse is great. This is not civic disobedience. And I would ask you and Ms. Hatch to review the Constitution, Article 1, Section 33, when you wear the hat as an elected leader, a governmental leader, you don't get to choose which laws you uphold and which you don't. Now, the people do. That is civic disobedience. But that can have a huge repercussion. I want to be fair in saying that when you ask questions from Mr. Mahoney last week, you asked really good questions. And I like that. And it's not just I see the benefit of the talent that we have and the perspectives of all three of you and other leaders here. That is the benefit to Franklin County. That's what I want to see. And that is ethical. To make these disparaging remarks in a county meeting, I'm very used to her attacks. And she's been attacking Mr. Peck for years. So I just ask you to advise her as your chairman of the party that she is really hurting. She could really be in trouble. And Ms. Hatch, I forgive you. I forgive you for just your constant attack, your misunderstanding. The benefits factor, I just checked with the head of the HR department. There's no extra money going to Mr. Peck. No taxpayer extra money. You either get that in the benefit of coverage or you get the cash. It's no extra. So I really want that to lay down and be dealt with. And that is ethics, is going and getting the information. Thank you so much. You have a good day.
Thank you, Michelle. Any other public comment?
Couple things. One about this ordinance or this declaration that you're thinking about making. Before each meeting, we stand up and we pledge allegiance to the flag. And a part of what I see you doing is reaffirming our support for both our state and our nation's Constitution. And it's one of our rights. And if we don't exercise our rights, we'll lose them just like muscle in our body. If we don't exercise our bodies, we will lose what we have. So I'm certainly encouraged and thankful that you are reaffirming our support for the Constitution, both state and national. On the drug thing, this is an issue that's pretty close to home for me right now. I have a daughter that's almost to graduate. And at the graduations parties that our children have, it's legal now to have any number of illicit drugs, but they can't have alcohol and tobacco. And that's really scary. And some of you know that I've been talking to people lately about our support for law enforcement. And some of you have heard me say this before, but I carry a challenge coin in my pocket for about 10 years now. And the reason I carry that coin is not for the reason that most people do, but for me, it's a reminder when I put it in my pocket in the morning to be thankful for those that serve and protect both our country and our county and our city. And so when we do this, we're undermining the authority and undermining the tools that our law enforcement has to protect us. And sometimes we take for granted that they're on the other end of the phone when we call and ask for help. And it scares me, the thought of the day when they don't come when you call. And so thank you for fighting and representing us. And if the state doesn't do it, I certainly think that you need to. Is it going to be easy? No, it's not. Is it going to take a lot of challenges? Yes, it will. Could it potentially put the county in jeopardy in some way or another? I suppose it probably could, but it's really important that we give our law enforcement the tools they need to protect us. They put their life on the line every day, and we need to put ourselves out there to protect them in every way that we can. And so I appreciate our prosecuting attorney's stance on that, our sheriff's stance, and certainly would encourage you three to stand very strongly with our law enforcement. And if the state doesn't protect them adequately, I would encourage you to do everything that you can to give them the tools that they need to protect us. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Anybody else for public comment?
Hi, Tony Simpson, 6213 Coventry Lane in Pasco. I'd like to just reiterate what this gentleman just said, and we need to support the prosecutor and the sheriff and give them the tools they need so they don't have to hand the fentanyl back, the cocaine, whatever it is. The hard, a marijuana cigarette, that's one thing. We're all for reasonable measures, but if they have to hand them back their fentanyl and their meth or whatever, the crack pipe, and hey, have a good night, guys, drive safely, then that's not going to keep the community safe. And with regard to the question earlier about the measure to reaffirm our commitment to the Constitution, I can understand Mr. Peck's position. Hey, we've already did that. This is grandstanding. On the other hand, our constitutional rights are under unprecedented attack in the or it certainly seems like that to a lot of us. And we're frankly getting a little apprehensive, let's put it that way at this point. And so under that set of circumstances, it might be appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else, public comment? Keith, anybody on the phone? Okay, with that, I will move into executive session, RCW 42.30.110, parentheses 1, parentheses G, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And it's 5 minutes?
I think that would be adequate.
Okay.
I would ask that Carly from the HR department, myself, and the board be allowed to participate in that.
And the clerk of the board?
Yeah, she can stay.
Okay. All righty. So with that, we'll move into executive session for 5 minutes. We have come out of executive session with no decisions being made. We are back into convened meeting.
I move to allow the county administrator to make a job offer for the RV park caretaker position to Susan Grant at grade 12, step 5, and authorize the chair to sign the personnel action form if the offer is accepted.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. With that, we are down to any more business for the good of the county. Anything?
No business from my side, just a couple of updates. There's, as I stated earlier, there's a lot of ongoing discussion about COVID-related stimulus type money coming to Franklin County. Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. There's a great deal of discussion with the congressional delegation on some of the federal monies that are coming. The state is still obviously working through their budget. We may see some local funds allocated by the state for transportation and infrastructure. Their capital budget has not yet been adopted. So I'm spending quite a bit of time on those issues. There is a informal discussion taking place amongst the cities and counties in the Tri-Cities area about perhaps working together on some projects. I think you're all aware of the idea for a one-stop mental health facility in the community. That might be an opportunity. I think you're aware that our juvenile detention center is, the administration building there is in desperate need of some upgrades or replacement. And so there may be a reason to dedicate some of our funding to that process, but those are just ideas and they haven't even been formalized to be put on paper. So I don't have a formal proposal for spending this money, but we will take that up at a future meeting. So I want to just be aware that's where I'm spending a lot of my time right now.
So Keith, I sat in on the WASAC meeting yesterday and a lot of talk on there about broadband.
Yeah.
Is that one of the avenues we can?
It is. I received a proposal that I have not had a chance to follow up with yet from the Franklin PUD on broadband projects in Franklin County that they would be interested in pursuing if they can get the money. There's still a question about whether that has to come through us to give funding to them or whether they will have a direct allocation of funds for broadband. It's an issue at the state and the national level to be able to take broadband services into communities or households that don't currently have access to it. It's increasingly becoming a fundamental need for most families, for example, particularly in the COVID restriction where students are at home trying to access education resources online. If they don't have good computer access, it really hinders their ability to tap into those resources. So it's very much an item of discussion across all levels of government.
Right. So with that, if there is any more questions, Commissioner Patrick?
Mr. Mahoney, I asked you to stick around. Maybe you'd come up to the mic here. I suspect that my fellow commissioners are getting some of the same feedback from constituents that I am, which is that it seems to be taking an inordinately long time for packages to get through planning and permitting. I have an opinion as to why that is. I think we're short-staffed.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got a planning director who was out for a time with a personal serious medical matter and is fortunately back to work, but still probably not full-time. And we've got a backlog and we've got unprecedented growth. And it is the perfect storm, so to speak. And I'm interested in starting a conversation about how we remedy this, if not in the long term, at least in the short term. Two ideas that come to mind are that one, excuse me, given the size of our county and the growth, I think we need more planners. Two, I know that planners are hard to come by. And three, if we aren't able to find good planners, then I think we need to be looking at expanding our contract services for that kind of work. If there are any appropriately licensed contract servers, in the area that are available. I don't even know that they are. So I'm bringing it up to ask you for your thoughts. I don't mean to blindside you, because I didn't have the opportunity to get with you ahead of time. So if you need to come back next week, that's fine. But maybe your initial impressions today do you agree that we've got a serious staffing and backlog issue? And do you have any thoughts on how we ought to approach it?
I'm going to answer your comments with a yes. We have a serious staffing issue with the amount of proposals, permits that are coming through, building permits. Of course, we had one individual building inspector that left. We have our building official is planning on leaving. His last day, I believe, will be, I want to say somewhere in June. Yeah. And so we've been working on that.
You said leaving, did you mean retiring? Or?
Retiring, that's what I was told, so.
Okay, tentatively.
Yes. And so we, of course, have had to fill that backlog, and with everything that's been going on in this state, of course, with the changes to the building codes, of course, there was a mad rush for people to get stuff in, trying to beat the requirements. So that's one thing. But on the planning side, certainly, I picked up on that at the time when the board first chose to put planning and building under me, that there is a huge staffing issue on that side. The other is I think that we have to look at the positions themselves and make sure that we actually have the right positions, the right job descriptions, instead of continuing to do things the same way we've done them forever. One of the individuals that we hired on the building side, he's got some great ideas from his experience. I think that will be beneficial, but certainly on the planning side, I believe we need a minimum of one more planner to assist, because right now what you have is the director, the planning and building director, who spends all of his time on the phone answering questions, that if he had more another planner under him, they could be working with those, and he could be doing his duty with, dealing with the SEPAs and all of that, and trying to step those timelines. So yes, there's a lot of growth. We talked about it in the past. I've looked at comparable counties, and when you look at comparable counties to
We're
our
about
county,
50%, aren't we?
yes,
Yeah.
we're about 50% compared to them, and our county especially is the fastest growing. Pasco's the fastest growing city, and when we talk about Pasco, it seems like, well, they would be seeing all of it, but the reality of it is we're seeing it out in the urban growth area. So it makes it tough, and I understand, and I talk to a lot of individuals every day that are frustrated and reach out, and I reach back with them and talk to them, and we don't make any excuses. You know me, I will not make excuses, but certainly that's one of the things that I've absolutely picked up on.
Well,
had conversations with
your
Keith.
success is predicated on us giving you the resources to be successful. I don't think we've done that. I don't believe that we can afford to undertake a lengthy process of reviewing, hiring people as a solution. That's a long-term
Yeah.
solution. But I think in the short term, we need to see if we can find local contract, immediately available assistance,
Right.
and do the other long-term piece simultaneously.
I agree.
Do you
Yes.
agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that.
Okay.
If I may interject, we are still using AHBL for some services, and they've been good to.
Yeah, I think the issue there is
For our-
I think the issue with AHBL, to be quite frank with you, is the fact that we're overextending their ability to provide service for us. I saw that when we, with the absence of our director, because they still are working on our comp plan as well. And so with their local resources, it makes it very difficult. So in this sense, I believe I have to agree with Commissioner Peck, and we need to probably, not probably, I believe what we need to do in the interim is we need to solicit for planning services to assist in getting this backflow of stuff done, this work done.
Now, are other counties in our region in similar dire straits? And I believe with many of them, we have agreements for various forms of sharing, mostly equipment, but some services. Could you speak to that? Are they an option, getting help from other counties?
May I interject here? This was not put on the schedule. And to be fair with the public, I think we got to do is bring, and we should have it so the public can, because being that it wasn't on the schedule, the public are not here. And I'm sure there's going to be, as Commissioner Peck has stated, my phone has been ringing off the hook. And I think that we need to have the public input. So, and that'll give Mr. Mahoney a little bit more time to prepare.
Yeah.
So with that, would you be willing to come back next week on this?
I'm at the
Right.
the boards.
Thank you.
So I agree with that. But the fact it's not on the agenda doesn't mean I can't ask you some questions. And my question was, and I think you've answered it frankly, is just your preliminary assessment and your willingness to come back. The only thing that you haven't responded to is whether or not your initial impression is that other counties might be a source of assistance.
That's something I don't have a direct answer right now,
Okay,
but
good
certainly
enough.
something I can check in and.
Check into. That's,
So all I'm trying to do
Yeah.
here is start the conversation and light the fire and look forward to hearing more next week. Thanks.
I have
Thank you,
one
ma'am.
question. Is the planning department, is it open to the public? Is it fully operational there at this time? Or we saw before?
They're fully, just like a lot of our facilities, even Public Works, our door is
Locked.
it's locked, but we open it up. We haven't heard any complaints from that standpoint. I'm not sure what each board member has heard about
I heard
planning, because
somebody
we're
knocked
still
at
under the, excuse me,
the-
go
I
ahead.
just- I had heard that somebody knocked at the door and, the weather was bad and they just finally got tired of waiting. So that's why I raised the question.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. Even me, when I go there, and I'm there quite often, I knock on the door and usually I'll peek in and they'll see me and they'll come out. But they're doing what a lot of us are doing, is by appointment. We do have like a back bell and the front.
Okay.
We're there. I mean, our office is
I just want to make
staffed.
sure if we have a bell or something that they can ring, 'cause if they don't stand out there,
Yeah.
it's frustrating.
That's unfortunate, because even though we're doing everything we can to comply.
Sure.
One of the things I don't want to happen is for the citizens of Franklin County to not be adequately served. And so it's good to hear that. I've not heard that directly, that people have had those conflicts at the doors, but certainly it's something I'll work with, because our front door is totally visible. Somebody knocks, we hear it. I see people going by my office. I get up, I jump out. We also have direction to go around to the back door where they have a bell, but we're still required to have people sign in when they come into our offices under the current orders and all of that. So we still have our sign-in sheet and following all the protocols. And so, yeah, it does make it difficult, but what we're seeing too is, of course, on our staff has done a great job prior to COVID hitting of making sure that all of our business from a permitting standpoint on the county roadside can actually be done online. And we have, before COVID ever hit, a lot of the different individuals, whether they be developers or contractors that typically do work in Franklin County, they've already been taking advantage of that ability to do all of their permitting online, and then us following through with the permitting process. So I know with planning and building, that's one of our main focuses as well. But again, that comes down to resources available to work on those specific things, to get to make that all available to them and stuff. So, you know, it's a tough thing. I've been perfectly frank with all of the commissioners when they come on, is, you know, there is a commissioner's handbook, and you can find it on the County Road Administration Board site. You can find it on MRSC. And if you go through that, which I have because I'm interested in all levels of county, one of the things that it says in there is the most difficult thing that board members will deal with as active board members is land use issues. And so people want to get stuff done, and we have laws that you know, I'm not saying I agree with all of them, but there's always going to be that conflict. And our job is to try to make it as easy as possible for individuals. And unfortunately, if there's frustrations or whatever, certainly I'd like to know about it. I always tell people, I don't know what I don't know. And if they're calling you, I please direct them to me. I will absolutely, anybody who's worked with me, you know, long enough knows that I will call them back immediately. I will meet with them in person. We will do whatever we can to fix whatever the problem is. So
I think, Matt, history has shown that you're very service oriented, and I appreciate it. And I'll just close with this thought, which is it takes time to hire people, especially when the county has a hiring freeze in place. So please initially look seriously at hiring some contract help.
absolutely. I
Thanks.
appreciate that input. Thank
Okay, and we'll look forward to next week with the presentation. We'll put it on the agenda. Presentation, but we'll have it on the agenda for this discussion.
Okay, perfect.
And then you can check with the other counties about working with them.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Yeah,
sir.
And we do plan on doing a presentation. It's just, that would be
Okay.
a little bit.
Okay.
So absolutely, I'll be here available to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And I've heard nothing but good about you.
I
So,
appreciate that.
and I appreciate your willingness to help the public. I just wanted to bring that
Yeah.
up to his attention. So
I love what I do, and I love this community. So
thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
It shows. All right. With that, is there any other business?
I don't have any. I think you all received an email from me during the week about the idea of maybe having commissioners and myself
Yes.
kind of give some updates on things that we're working on.
Yes.
I don't know if you want to.
I think that's a great idea.
I think we
Appreciate
should we include it in the beginning of the meeting or at the end of the meeting, or when should we
The
do it?
benefit of meeting is it
Yes.
allows the public to
Yes.
comment or ask questions if they have those. And you know, obviously now, Mr. Bauman stuck around for the remainder of the meeting, but not everybody always does that. So if you do it at the end of the meeting, you're probably less likely to get the
Right.
exposure you want.
So in your email, is there a prescribed amount of time that we're going to give each commissioner to present?
That I would leave to the discretion of the board, you know, how long you want to have your meetings last and really how much information. I don't think you want to do things that are repetitive or
Right.
tedious. I try to strike a balance between what is essential and what can maybe be dealt with in a text message or email, but that's really kind of up to you to decide how much time you want to spend on those things.
Commissioners, what do you think? I know that Commissioner Peck on the WASAC committees, he's probably going to have a lot of detailed information, but as far as we are on our boards, Ben Franklin Transit, Housing Authority, those type of things, I could do a pretty quick 3-minute.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and I appreciate you bringing the idea forward. I think that's what we need, maybe more communication.
Sharing information is critical.
Credit the clerk, it was largely her idea, but I support it. I think it's a great way to add communication to it.
Yep, exactly. And thank you, Ms. Milham.
Actually, the clerk of Grant County idea and she had put it forward.
I just
There you go. She goes trying to shed the credit. She's very humble. All right, with that,